Masechet Avoda Zara, Daf Nun Bet. The Mishnah taught Avoda Zara shenochri asura miyad. An idol that belongs to a non-Jew is prohibited immediately when it's fashioned, even before it's actually worshipped. That's in contrast to the more lenient law for an idol that belongs to a Jew. Only becomes prohibited when it's actually worshipped. Matnitin maneh. Gemara asks, who is the author of this Mishnah? Rabbi Akiva he. It is Rabbi Akiva. We're going to see a Braita that's going to show that it's actually a matter of controversy. And the Braita and the Gemara will discuss the proofs for each side. Tanya, abed abedun et kol hamekomot asher avedu sham hagoyim bechelim shenishtameshu behem la'avoda zara katuv medaber. The pasuk that we're going to analyze in depth, so let's look at it inside, says abed abedun et kol hamekomot, destroy all the places asher avedu sham hagoyim asher atem yorishimotam et Elohehem, destroy all the sites at which the nations you are to dispossess worship their gods. So read literally, it seems to be saying that you should destroy the places. It even goes on and says the mountains, the hills. But we already learned that one does not have to destroy the mountains themselves, but rather the gods. So let's see how this Midrash understands it. This pasuk is talking not about the places themselves. You can't destroy a place, but rather it's the vessels that are used in order to serve the idol. Those are the things that you have to destroy. Yachol asa'um velo gemarum, gemarum velo hebium, hebium velo nishtameshu bahem, yachol ihu asurim. And now we wonder, at what point do these vessels become prohibited? What if you fashioned them but didn't completely fashion them? You didn't complete it. Or what if you complete it but you didn't bring it to the idol? Or what if you brought it to the place of the idol but didn't yet use this item? Would it be prohibited? Talmud Omar, asher avedu sham hagoyim. That's why the pasuk continues and says, where the idol, the nations worship. The pasuk is a bit repetitive, and so now we understand why it has to say shed abedu, only if they actually worshipped there, meaning only if they actually used those vessels. Then they are prohibited. Mikan amiru avodah zara shenochri asura ad shetaved v'shel Yisrael asura miyad divrei Rabbi Ishmael. And this is the source for which the Mishnah, from which we can learn what the Mishnah says. Mikan amru. There's a common phrase in Midrash Halacha that the Midrash, it seems from here that the Mishnah came first, even though both Midrash Halacha and the Mishnah are composed by the Tanaim, but the Mishnah seems to come first and gives you the bottom line law, and then afterwards the Tanaim said, oh, you want to know the derivation? So then they give the derivation from the pasuk. But the fact here says Mikan amru shows that the Midrash Halacha is quoting the Mishnah. So this is the source for what we learned in the Mishnah, that an idol of a non-Jew is not prohibited until it's actually worshipped, but that of a Jew is prohibited immediately. This is the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael against the Mishnah. That's really actually quite interesting. This Mikan Amru is not quoting our Mishnah, it's quoting a different Mishnah. It's quoting a Mishnah that we don't actually have, because our Mishnah only quotes the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, and it quotes it anonymously. So what you see here is a possible quotation from a remnant of a lost version of the Mishnah from the school of Rabbi Ishmael. Our Mishnah that we have is from the school of Rabbi Akiva, although our Mishnah sometimes quotes Rabbi Ishmael and a few of his students, but it quotes them much less. Mostly it quotes Rabbi Akiva and his students and their students. So our Mishnah is from the school of Rabbi Akiva. We don't have a Mishnah from the school of Rabbi Ishmael. However, there must have once existed such a work, because here we have a quote from it, Mikan Amru. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Chilufa Devarim. But this Midrash goes on, Baraita goes on and quotes Rabbi Akiva and says, no, I think the opposite. Avodah zara shel nochri asura miyad v'shel Yisrael ad shete'aved. If the idol belongs to a non-Jew, it's prohibited immediately when fashioned, but if it belongs to a Jew, it's only prohibited once it is actually worshipped, which is exactly what we have in our Mishnah. So we answered the question. Our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Akiva so far did not give a proof, and nor do we know how he deals with Rabbi Ishmael's proof, but that's what we're going to go on to explain. Amar Mor, Bechelim shenishtameshu behen la'avodah zara katuv medaber, ha'mekomot ketiv. First, we're going to analyze the proof that Rabbi Ishmael brought. He said that this pasuk that says abet abedun is talking about destroying the prohibition against vessels that were used in order to worship idols. But the pasuk doesn't say vessels; it says places. However, we cannot take this pasuk literally, that is talking about destroying the places, because places do not become prohibited. We already have a derasha about that says, destroy the gods that are on the mountains. So you have to destroy an idol that's on top of a mountain. But you don't destroy the mountain itself. So the mountain doesn't become prohibited. Even if a mountain is worshipped, you're allowed to go and hike there and quarry from there and plant things on there. So when it says destroy the places, it doesn't mean literally the places. Therefore, it must apply to something else. The pasuk has to mean something. Therefore, we say it's referring to vessels. Mikana meru avoda zara shanochri ena surah ela ad shete'aved v'she'Yisrael miyad. And this is what we learned, and this is according to the school of Rabbi Ishmael, that an idol of a non-Jew is only prohibited once it's worshipped. But if the idol belongs to a Jew, then it's prohibited immediately once it's made. Hold on, this pasuk you just said is talking about vessels, not gods. In other words, this proof itself is jumping from one subject to another. You said the pasuk mentions mekomot. Fine, places can't become prohibited. Therefore, the pasuk is referring to vessels. Vessels that are used, they become prohibited. And then you skip a step, because then you say mikan amru. Therefore, gods that belong to non-Jews only become prohibited when they are actually worshipped. But you didn't say anything about gods here, meaning the idol itself. You only said that the vessels become prohibited once they are worshipped. But how do you know that the law for vessels is the same as is for gods? Maybe for vessels, the vessel is only prohibited once it's actually used in worship. But maybe the god of non-Jews is prohibited once it's made. How are you making that jump? And the answer is Amar Kera, Asher atem yoreshimotam et Elohehem, Makish Elohehem lekelim. That's why the continuation of the pasuk, which is also somewhat repetitive, says that you are going to inherit their gods. So you see that their gods, meaning the idol itself, is compared to back with the vessels. Makilim ad sheyavdu ad af Elohem name ad sheyavdu. Just like we learned from the beginning of the pasuk, that their vessels are only prohibited once they are used in worship, so to the idols of non-Jews are only prohibited once they are used in worship. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with this law. So what will he say about this derivation? He will say that the word et breaks between the two parts of the pasuk. So you have the pasuk that says, period, and then the word et is a separator, and therefore the word et comes to say, do not apply whatever law you're going to apply in the first half of the pasuk. That does not apply to Elohim, does not apply to the idols, and therefore he does not derive that comparison. Rabbi Ishmael, ashkechan avoda zara shanochri te'en asura ad shete'aved d'Yisrael asura miyad minaleh. Okay, fine. Now for Rabbi Akiva, we have a derivation that an idol of a non-Jew is only prohibited once it's worshipped. But how does he know that an idol that belongs to a Jew is prohibited immediately? So we start off saying, well, it's kind of rational. It's logical. If the idol of a non-Jew only becomes prohibited when it's worshipped, then shouldn't the law for a Jew be more stringent and be prohibited immediately when fashioned? Then we answer, maybe not. It's not so rational. Maybe an idol of a Jew never becomes prohibited. Now, why would you think it's never becomes prohibited? Because maybe Jews, even if they make an idol, they don't really believe in the idol. A Jew, to his core, has a Jewish spirit and knows that Hashem is in charge. And so you might think that an idol of a Jew never actually becomes prohibited, even if he worships the idol. It's obvious he doesn't really mean it. He's just doing it for whatever reason. And so you might think that the idol of a Jew never becomes prohibited at all. So therefore, by reason, you can reason the opposite way. But then we reject that reasoning and say, if an idol that belongs to a Jew requires being buried, being put away, meaning that we know the law that an idol of a non-Jew, the non-Jew can nullify it. He can break it and nullify it, and then it becomes permitted. But a Jew doesn't have the ability to nullify his own idol. So if there's no way to nullify an idol, a Jew's idol, all you can do is, you can actually destroy it. It's interesting. It doesn't say destroy it here, but rather it says put it away. We'll see why it says put it away in a second. But anyway, you want to put it away to make sure that nobody will use it in the future. So if there's no way to nullify it, but you have to put it away, then certainly that implies that it is prohibited. Otherwise, why would you have to put it away or destroy it? So it doesn't make any sense to say that of an idol of a Jew never becomes prohibited. It certainly is prohibited. This question is, on what level? So go back to the original reasoning. So doesn't it make sense that for a Jew would be more stringent? We say no. Maybe it has the same law as that of a non-Jew, that in both cases, only when it's worshipped, it becomes prohibited, but not when it's fashioned. How does Rabbi Yishmael know that the idol of a Jew is more stringent? Even when it's fashioned, it's prohibited. Amar keravet chatatchem asher asitem et ha'egel. Bishat asiyah kam le bechet. Because it says regarding the golden calf, Moshe says, I took your sin, the calf that you made, and burned it with fire. Notice, it doesn't say the calf that you worshipped, but that you made. Meaning, from the point, it was eventually worshipped, but he doesn't say that. He says that you made, meaning that from the point at which it was made, it already is a sin and is already prohibited. Now we ask, hold on, Moshe only says the sin that you made. Maybe that only means that making it is a sin upon the person, but it doesn't mean that the item that they made becomes a prohibited item yet. Just because it's fashioned, maybe only once it's worshipped. Because it says, right, only chet here. Amar kera arur ha'ish asher ya'aseh pesel u'masecha. Mishat asiyah kam le be'arur. Okay, we'll try another pasuk that says, cursed is a person who makes a graven or molten image. You see that from the time that it's made, already there's a curse. But here also we reject it for the same reason. Maybe we're just cursing the person who makes an idol because he violated a sin. But it doesn't say here in the pasuk that the idol itself becomes prohibited for anyone else to get any benefit from. So this is not yet a proof that an idol is prohibited to a Jew immediately when it's made. And the final answer is Tovat Hashem Ketiv, that as an idol is an abomination to Hashem. That's not referring to the person, but to the idol itself as an abomination. So we learn from there that as soon as it's made, it's an abomination and therefore prohibited. That's Rabbi Yishmael's proof that an idol of a Jew becomes prohibited immediately. Rabbi Akiva. Now, what's Rabbi Akiva's source? What's Rabbi Akiva going to do with this pasuk that says Tavat Hashem? And this suggests that the idol of a Jew becomes prohibited as an abomination immediately. But Rabbi Akiva said only once it's worshipped. Rabbi Akiva will explain To'ava to mean Tavat Hamevi Lideh To'ava. This is called an abomination because it can lead to an action that is abominable. So the idol of a Jew, as soon as it's made, it's still permitted, but it's called an abomination because once it's made, it's likely that someone will worship it, and at that point, it will become prohibited. So that's how he deals with that pasuk. Now let's look for sources for Rabbi Akiva's positions. How does he know that an idol that belongs to a non-Jew is stringent and is prohibited immediately? Amarula markera pesile Elohehem tisrefun ba'esh mishe piselo naasa Eloah. The pasuk says the word pesel has a number of meanings. They're all related meanings. So in the simple reading, pisilo Elohehem, pesel means an idol, a graven image. Graven because like pesol lecha, Hashem tells Moshe, engrave for you the aluchot, right? So you have to engrave them. When you engrave something, you're chiseling away the a part of it so that the letters are indented. So it means something that you're hollowing out. That is the same word as an idol, because an idol also you chisel away to make it, but also because an idol itself is hollow. It has no function. It has no power. It's a hollow thing. We're going to see another meaning of lifsol is like pasul, meaning nullified, not important, which has the same idea that when you chisel something out, then it's hollow, then it's no longer there. So too, if you have something that's important and you nullify it now, it's no longer there, it loses its status. So all these definitions of lifsol are going to come into play right now. So the pasuk says that their idols you should burn in fire, and we learn from the word pisile, taken as a verb. Once you engrave it, once you chisel the idol, once you fashion it, it already is Elohim, it already is a god. And this is referring to gods of non-Jews. They are prohibited from the time of fashioning. V'idach, now Rabbi Ishmael, what will he do with that pasuk? Hahumi ba'aleh detaneh Rav Yosef, detaneh Rav Yosef, minayin legoy sheposel Eloho, shene'emar pisile Elohim tisrefun ba'esh. Rabbi Ishmael will use this pasuk for the teaching of Rav Yosef, that Rav Yosef says, quotes as a braita, because Rav Yosef taught in a braita. How do you know that a non-Jew has the ability to nullify his God? Because it says here, the pesile Elohim, the nullification of their gods. So there you go, right? That's referring to the ability to nullify lifsol Elohim. V'idach, now Rabbi Akiva, where will he derive this halacha? Certainly Rabbi Akiva agrees that non-Jews can nullify their idols. Nafkale midishmuel, dishmuel rameh. כתיב לא תחמוד כסף וזהב עליהם, וכתיב לקחת לך הכסד, פסלו לאלוה לא תחמוד, פסלו מאלוה ולקחת לך. Rabbi Akiva can learn this law, that a non-Jew can nullify his idol, from Shemuel's statement. Shemuel brought two pisukim that seem to contradict each other. On the one hand, it says, do not covet the silver or the gold that is on their idols. But then the pasuk says, take it for yourself. Now, the simple reading is it all is read together. Don't covet them and take them. But we're reading them as two separate sentences. Here it says, don't covet. And then it says, take them. Well, should you not covet them? Don't take them. Or should you take them? So how could it be? And the answer is, if he chiseled it to be an idol, then it's prohibited. Lo tachmod. So you see, it's prohibited from the time that it even makes it. But if he piselo, if he makes it nullified, if he chisels a piece off, and by doing that nullifies it from being a god, then you can take it. Then it's nullified and is no longer prohibited. So that's how he derives the law that a non-Jew can nullify his idol. Rabbi Akiva, Ashkechan Avoda Zara shel nochri dasura miyad tisel ad shetaved midalan. Now we saw a source for Rabbi Akiva that an idol of a non-Jew is prohibited immediately when fashioned. But how does he know that the idol of a Jew is only prohibited once it's worshipped? Amar Yehuda Amar Kera Vesam Basater Ad Sheyaseh La Devarim Shebaseter. Because pasuk and end of Devarim says, cursed is someone who makes a graven or molten image. We saw that part of the pasuk, and sets it up in a hidden place. What do you mean sets it up in a hidden place? That is referring to the act of idolatry. A Jew certainly would be embarrassed to worship an idol in public. So more likely they'll take the idol in private and worship it in a hidden place. And so sambasetet, placing it in a hidden place, is referring to the worshiping of it. Only then it becomes prohibited. V'idach, and Rabbi Ishmael, what will he do with that pasuk? Hahu mi ba'yaleh kederbi lichdерbi Yitzchak. Damar Rabbi Yitzchak minayin avodah zara shel Yisrael sheteuna geniza shene'emar v'sam basater. Rabbi Ishmael will use this pasuk for the teaching of Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak is, of course, later than Rabbi Ishmael, but the point is he has to find some way to derive this law, that how do you know that an idol that belongs to a Jew, there's no way to nullify it, but rather it has to be put away. It can also be destroyed. So remember, we'll see why it says, or refers to here, just putting it away. Anyway, it has to be either destroyed or put away. How do you know? Because it says, place it in a hidden place. So this is referring to, not like Rabbi Akiva says, is not referring to the worshipping of it in a hidden place, but rather the putting it away, because there's no way for a Jew to nullify it, rather it has to be hidden away. Ve'idach, and Rabbi Akiva, where will he learn this halacha from, that an idol of a Jew has to be put away? Nafkale mid Rav Chisda Amar Rav, Tamar Rav Chisda Amar Rav, Minayin Avoda Zara she'isel she'teuna geniza, shenemar lo tita alecha ashera kol etz esel mizbeach. Ma mizbeach teuna geniza, af ashera teuna geniza. He will learn it from the law that Rav Chisda says the name of Rav, who asks, how do you know that an idol that belongs to a Jew has to be hidden away? Because there's no way for a Jew to nullify its status, because the pasuk says, do not plant an Asherah tree, Etzel, as the continuation is Mizbach Hashem. Mizbach Hashem meaning the altar, the proper altar in the Mishkan, or in the Bet HaMikdash. That's a law. You're not allowed to have a tree in the middle of the Mishkan, a prohibited tree. These were the Asherah trees that people would put. This, by the way, is a halacha l'maaseh even to today in a Bet Knesset. You're not allowed to plant a tree inside a Bet Knesset because it will look like you're worshiping the tree and would be Asherah worship. Anyway, where this pasuk is comparing an Asherah, juxtaposing an Asherah tree to Hashem's Mizbeach. What's the comparison? Just like an altar. Let's say you had a mizbeach, a proper mizbeach to Hashem that you can't use anymore. What are you going to do with it? Just throw out the stones? Use them as pavement? No, they're holy. So you have to hide them away. They can't be used for any secular purpose. So you put them away so that no one will use them. So too, an Asherah tree, an idol or any other idol that a Jew worships has to be put away. This explains why we were talking about Genizah the whole time before, not only destroying. Of course, if it's an idol, one can also smash it up, destroy it. Mizbeach, you don't want to destroy because it's a holy item. So you don't want to smash it into pieces. Rather, you put it away in a respectful way. Like Genizah that we would do for a Sefer Torah or a Mezuzah, things that are holy. We can't use them, so we put them away, we bury them to be respectful, but also so that no one will use them. I think this is a really fascinating juxtaposition that we're learning the laws of what to do with an idol that's worshipped by a Jew from the laws of what to do with the Mizbeach that we can't use anymore. I'm not sure if we could read more philosophy into this derasha. Maybe it's just a technical derasha, but maybe the rabbis are recognizing something like the Rambam's position that sacrifices, the Mizbeach and all that the Torah does mandate and therefore is permitted and even commanded, is still a holdover, a remnant of idol worshippers, and so Bnei Israel were just used to that. So as a compromise, the Torah says, okay, you can do a few of these things, a little bit in one place, you can make some sacrifices, have one Mizbeach, but don't have any more. But this comparison itself is reminding us that there is some similarity and a slippery slope, as every Navi said. Anytime the Nevi'im came and said, Hashem does not want your sacrifices, He wants you to be kind to the orphan and the widow and so on. So the Nevi'im recognized that even having one Mizbeach to Hashem, which is fine, it's good, but it so easily can turn into Avoda Zara, which is in fact what happened during most of the first Bet HaMikdash. So I wonder if this comparison in the Midrash may be hinting to such an idea. In any case, Ve'idach, now we ask, Rabbi Ishmael, what does he do with this pasuk? ההוא מבעלה לחדרש לקיש. דאמר ריש לקיש, כל המעמיד דיין שאינו הגון, כאילו נוטע אשרה בישראל, שנאמר, שופטים ושוטרים תיתן לך בכל שעריך, וסמיך לא תיטע לך אשרה כל עץ. Rabbi Ishmael will use this pasuk for the teaching of Resh Lakish, who said, anyone who appoints a judge over a people that is not a proper judge, he doesn't have training, he doesn't know what he's doing, he takes bribes, whatever, if he's not a proper judge over Israel, that's like planting an Asherah tree among the Jewish people. That miscarriage of justice, and you're the cause if you make that, is the same as Avodah Zara. How do you know that? Because the pasuk says, place judges and officers in all your gates, and talks about their proper qualifications. And then a couple of Pisukim later, it says, do not plant an Asherah tree. So it's the same thing. And this is, again, this juxtaposition is not just a technical one that, look, this pasuk happens to be somewhat near that pasuk, but rather we should always see these types of hekesh as being conceptually linked, because Hashem, what does Hashem stand for? God is a God of justice, and therefore judges who act properly are in fact called Elohim. That's a name that means judges in the Torah itself. So when one has a proper judge, that is bringing Hashem, manifesting God's will and presence down here into the earth. Whereas if one does injustice, then that's the same as bringing not Hashem, but rather idols, idol worship, where justice wasn't, the gods don't care about justice, they just care about getting food, getting meat. So it's the complete opposite. And so you see that there's a close connection between justice and Hashem, serving Hashem, versus injustice and serving idolatry. Amar Rav Ashi, b'makom Talmidei Chachamim, kilu nata etzel mizbeach, shenemar etzel mizbach. Rav Ashi adds that it's bad enough if someone appoints a judge who's not worthy. You should never do that. And if someone appoints a judge who's not worthy in a place where there are lots of proper Torah scholars, so you skipped over all the Torah scholars and instead you put this corrupt judge, that is even worse than making an Asherah. It's like putting an Asherah right next to the Mizbeach. The Talmidei Chachamim are like the altars. They're the servants of Hashem. And now you're taking this thing that doesn't belong, and not only are you planting it right next to supplant, to override the Mizbeach. That's why the Pasuk says, Etzel Mizbach Hashem. That would be even worse. That's what Bishmael does with that Pasuk. Ba'ed Rav Hamnuna, Ritech Keli Avoda Zara Mahu. Rav Hamnuna asked a question. If someone welded and mended a broken vessel that was used for Avoda Zara, what is the law? Now, before we answer this, actually, we're not going to answer it. We're going to leave it in the teku. But before we can even address it at all, we have to figure out what precisely was his question. Avodah Zara deman. To whom does this vessel belong? Ilem avodah zara denochri, ben Rabbi Ishmael, ben Rabbi Akiva, mishameshe avodah zara hen, mishameshe avodah zara en asurin ad she'yavdu. If you say it's a vessel that belongs to a non-Jew that was used for idolatry, well, in that case, both Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva agree that vessels that are used to serve an idol are not prohibited until they are actually worshipped. So we know that because they both read the pasuk abed to abedun et kol mekomot, and it says there mekomot, places, doesn't mean places, but rather vessels. And that pasuk says that they worship, that they use in worship. And so therefore we know that these are only prohibited once they're used in worship, and therefore a vessel that was broken, once it's broken, is nullified, belongs to a non-Jew, is nullified, and then when it's mended, then it's permitted, because it's like a new vessel, and therefore and has not been worshipped yet, and therefore would be permitted. So that's not much of a question. Ela avodah zara d'Israel. Rather, it's a vessel that belongs to a Jew that had been used for idolatry. Aliba deman. And so now it was broken, and now it's mended. So it's like a new vessel that belongs to a Jew that was made for idolatry. So what's the answer to that? Well, in that case, it will depend on whose opinion we follow. If we follow Rabbi Akiva, he says that an idol that belongs to a Jew itself only becomes prohibited when it's worshipped. So certainly the vessel will only be prohibited once it's worshipped. And therefore this item, since it was broken and now mended, is like a new item and is permitted until it's worshipped. Rather, let's ask the question according to Rabbi Ishmael, who says that an idol itself that belongs to a Jew is prohibited immediately when fashioned. What's the status of a vessel that's used to serve an idol? Should we derive the law about a vessel that belongs to a Jew from a vessel that belongs to a non-Jew? And just like a vessel of a non-Jew is only prohibited once it's worshipped, used in worship, so too the vessel of a Jew is only prohibited once it's used in worship, not just fashioned. Or should we learn it from an idol itself, where an idol that belongs to a Jew, according to Bishmael, is prohibited immediately, so too the vessels are prohibited immediately. So that really would be a question, and we don't have an obvious answer to that. So is that Rav Hamnuna's question? And we answer no. If that was the question, why would he be asking a question about a vessel that was used for idolatry that was broken and then mended? He could be instead just ask a simpler question about a new one. Tibayale asa, someone who made a new vessel that with intention that it will be used for idolatry. So what is the status according to Rabbi Ishmael if it belongs to a Jew? That would have been a much simpler question. Why are you complicating it by saying that it was used for idolatry, it was broken and now mended? So therefore, all that cannot be Rav Hamnuna's question. Rather, Rav Hamnuna mishum tum'a yeshana kemibaya leditnan. כלי מתכות, פשוטיהם ומקבליהן טמאים, נשתברו, טהרו, חזר ועשן כלים, יחזרו לטומאה ישנה. Rather, Hamnuna's question is regarding tum'ah that had been there, but then once it's broken, left, but now it's reconstituted, does it come back? This is a subject in Mishnah Masechet Kelim that says regarding metal vessels can become tameh whether they are flat or whether they have a receptacle that you can put something inside, whether they're flat or not. Now, here's the key point. If you have a metal vessel that was tameh, and it broke, once it broke, it's no longer a vessel. So then it becomes tahor. But then if you weld it back and turn it into a vessel again, the original tum'ah, this is ritual impurity tum'ah, that was there, comes back. Even though in the meantime, when it's broken, it's tahor, but when you weld it again and fix it and turn it into a vessel, then it becomes tameh. That's a law regarding old tum'ah. That's called tum'ah yeshana. Now we know that law is true regarding tum'ah that's on a doraita level. Ki hadra tum'ah hanemi le tum'ah doraita val tum'ah drabanan la or dilma la shena. And Rav Hamnuna's question is, this law of tum'ah yeshana, that for sure applies to tum'ah that is a doraita level. If a sheres or a dead body, all these things touch an item that's made out of metal, then it breaks and it comes back, you weld it back together, then certainly the tum'ah will come back. However, what about tum'ah drabanan? We learned that something that is prohibited as idolatry also is tameh. But that's not a deraita level. That's a drabanan. Keep people away from idolatrous things. If they're not so stringent about idolatry, they'll be extra stringent because it's also tameh. But this is all drabanan. So will we apply this to tum'ah drabanan or not? That's the Hamnuna's question. You had a vessel that was used for idolatry, and therefore it was tameh. But then it broke, and then you mended it again. Does the tum'ah status that it had, the rabbanan status, come back or not? That's his question, right? No, v'tabayele she'ar tumot rabbanan. No, if so, why is it asking specifically about idol worship tum'ah, which is only one type of tum'ah drabanan? There are many other types of tum'ah that are midrabanan. So why is it asking specifically about idol worship? And we have an answer to that. It's asking actually two questions back to back. Tum'ah drabanan mi hadra o la hadra. First of all, in general, other types of tum'ah drabanan, if a vessel became tameh and then broke and then was mended again, would it return or not? That's a general question. You're right. We could ask that about any type of tum'ah drabanan. Ve'imtim solomad la hadra tum'ah Avoda Zara mishum chumra Avoda Zara mi shavya Rabbanan ki tum'ah deoraita ola teku. And if you say that in general tum'ah midrabanan does not come back, what about tum'ah of Avoda Zara specifically? Perhaps because of the stringency of the law of idolatry, maybe the rabbis made this type of tum'ah drabanan extra stringent and gave it the status like tum'ah deoraita, in which it would come back. Or maybe not. That was Rav Hamnuna's double question, and that is the question that we leave unsolved. And now Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Yanai, Tikrovet avodah zara shel ochalim mahu. If you have food that was offered as a sacrifice to an idol, what is the status of that food? That food, if you have an idol there and you offer food to it, some bread, that bread certainly will become tameh. Just like the idol is tameh, midrabanan, so too the food is tameh midrabanan. The question is, let's say it belongs to a non-Jew, and the non-Jew nullifies the idol. Okay, so now the idol itself is not an idol, but now this bread that was served to the idol, will that become tahor, or does it remain tameh? That's the question. Now, before answering the question, we want to clarify what the question is. Why is he asking about the food? Why not ask about vessels, like a bowl or something that you use to serve the food in that serves the idol? Why not ask about that? If it becomes when you use it, it becomes tameh. If it's nullified, does the tumah go away or not? Why are you asking about the food? Ask about vessels. Kelim lami ba'yaleh. Kevan di'ithu ta'ara mebikveh tum'ah. B'mikveh tum'ah name batla. Kima ba'yaleh ochalin. No, we're not asking about vessels because there we know the answer. Since a vessel can be purified in a mikveh, even a vessel that's tameh, for any reason that's tameh, including if it was used for idolatry, if you put it in a mikveh, then it becomes tahor. So therefore, it makes sense. Since there is a way to make it tahor through a mikveh, so too, we would reason that if the idol became nullified, then the vessel also would become tahor. So it makes sense that a vessel will become tahor. We're not asking about that. We're asking about the food, because food that becomes tameh, you can't put a piece of bread in a mikveh and make it tahor. There's no way to make it tahor through a mikveh. So that's where we're asking, although there's no way to make it tahor through a mikveh, is there a way to make it tahor by nullifying the idol? That's why we're asking about food and not about a vessel. Wait a second. Why are you asking about the food? Why not ask about the idol itself? And a sculpture, an idol that is worshipped as avodah zara, it becomes prohibited. It belongs to a non-Jew and also becomes tameh. So how about that idol? If the non-Jew revokes it, nullifies it, now the idol itself is permitted. How about the tumah? Does it go away? And now you could say the same thing. It can go into a mikveh. But let's say the thing that's worshipped is itself a loaf of bread. So now that's the idol is a loaf of bread. You can't put it in a mikveh. How about ask about that? By nullifying it, does the tumah go away? Why are you asking about food that's offered as a sacrifice rather than food that's used as an idol? Avodah zara gufa lami bayala. No, we're not asking that. Kevan di isura batil, tumah nami batil. Because it's possible to nullify an idol and that belongs to a non-Jew. So therefore, we can assume that the tumah also will be nullified. If you can nullify the deoraita prohibition against using this item of idolatry, then certainly the drabanan tumah is going to go away from the idol. That also we don't have a question about. Kim kami ba'yaleh tikrovet avodah zara shelo chalin mai kevan disure la batil kidirav gidel tuma name la batila or dilma isur deoraita la batil tuma drabanan batil teku. Rather, we are asking specifically about something that is used as a sacrifice offered to an idol. That's food. That's the question. Because here's the two sides. Since food that is offered as a sacrifice to an idol cannot be nullified, even for a non-Jew who can nullify the idol itself, but the item that's offered as a sacrifice cannot be nullified. As Rav Gidel taught a couple of dapim ago, that it cannot, the sacrificial food to an idol cannot be nullified. So therefore, you might argue that even if you nullify the idol, the food also does not become nullified, and the tumah also does not go away. Or do we say that Rav Gidal's stringency only applies to the deoraita prohibition against getting any benefit from the sacrificial food? That's what even a non-Jew cannot nullify. But tumah, which is only to Rabbanan, maybe we would say that once the non-Jew nullifies the idol itself, then at least the tumah status of the food that was offered to it is nullified. Teko, and that we clarified the question, we say that the answer is left unresolved. בעמינא רבי יוסף בן שאול מרבי, כלים ששימשו בהן בבית חוניו, מהו שישתמשו בהן בבית המקדש? Rabbi Yosef ben Shaul asked Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, vessels that were used in the temple of Onias. The temple of Onias was once Kohen Gadol before the Hasmonean revolt. And in the events before the revolt of the Chashmonaim, when there was one Kohen Gadol who kicked out his brother, and then another one, corrupt one came, and then finally the Chashmonaim came. So one of them was Onias, who was a good Kohen Gadol, but he was kicked out. And then he went to Egypt, to a city called Leontopolis in 155 BCE, and he built a temple there that was just like the temple in Jerusalem, and he and the priests that were with him, Kohanim, proper Kohanim, were making korbanot. And so these korbanot are prohibited because you can only make sacrifices in one place that Hashem will choose in Yerushalayim. So this was an illegal temple. However, it seems that their intention was not to idolatry. They were worshiping Hashem. They figured that the Bet HaMikdash is all corrupt and everything is bad there, so there should be some place in the world where we have sacrifices to Hashem. So they made such sacrifices. Now the question is, although this is prohibited, and therefore these vessels are problematic, but can we take these vessels and use them in the Bet HaMikdash? That's the question. The question is specifically according to the opinion that says that this temple of Onias was not a house of idolatry. If it was a house of idolatry, so things that are used by Jews for idolatry cannot be nullified and certainly cannot be used for the Bet HaMikdash. So that, forget it. But the other opinion says it was not an idolatrous temple, and there is such an opinion that we see in the Mishnah in Menachot. Ditnan, Kohanim sheshimishu bebet chonyo lo yishamishu b'mikdash b'Yerushalayim ve'no tzarich lomar ledavar acher. Says that the Kohanim who served in the temple of Chonyo are not allowed to serve in the Bet HaMikdash in Yerushalayim. It's a kanas. The rabbi said, you did this bad thing. You knew that it was wrong, so now that's it. You're fined and you can't serve in the Bet HaMikdash. And certainly, if a Kohen, a Jewish, proper Kohen, served in Davar Acher, served idolatry, then for sure they would be disqualified from ever serving again in the Bet HaMikdash. From the fact that this Mishnah makes a distinction between Bet Chonyo and Davar Acher, so you see, Davar Acher means Avoda Zara, so therefore you see that Bet Chonyo was not Avoda Zara. Okay, so we're following that opinion that the house of Chonyo was not Avodah Zarah. It was improper because it was not in Yerushalayim, but it was still to Hashem. So here's the question: Kohanim hu de kansin hu Rabbanan mishum de bnei de anin hu aval kelim la o dilma la shena. When the rabbis made this fine against the Kohanim, is it only the Kohanim themselves? The rabbi said because they have awareness, bnei de'ah, they knew what they were doing. They knew this is against the Torah, and they did it anyway. So you know what? As a penalty, you can't be a Kohen in the Bet HaMikdash anymore. But we shouldn't apply a penalty to vessels, because the vessels have no brains. They don't know what they're doing. They didn't decide. So therefore the vessels, they were used, it's true, outside the Bet HaMikdash, but they were used for Hashem, not for idolatry. And therefore, they should be allowed to be used in the Bet HaMikdash. Do we say that? Or do we say, no, the penalty is across the board and applies to the Kohanim and also to the vessels? Amar lo asurim hen, u'mikraya bi'adenu ushchachnuhu. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi answered and said, these vessels are prohibited. And we once had a pasuk to tell us, to teach us that it's prohibited, but I forgot what the pasuk was. Itibe, kol hakelim asher hizniach hamelach achaz malchuto, b'malo hechanu vehikdashnu. So now Rabbi Yosef says, I have an objection to the ruling of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi from a pasuk in Divrei Amim that says that all of the vessels that Achaz, King Achaz, was an evil king. His son was a righteous king. So Achaz used the temple vessels for idolatry. So all those things that he had used for idolatry and during his kingdom. Later on, the people came and said, we prepare them and sanctify them now that they re-sanctified the Bet HaMikdash, and now they are prepared for use again. Now, my love, hechanu de atbelinhu, hikdashnu de akdishin de akdishnanhu. Now, when it says that the temple servants here that came and prepared and sanctified, what does that mean? Prepared, doesn't that refer to that they were tameh? So put them in the mikveh. Now they're tahor. And sanctified them means that now although they were used for Avodah Zara, now they are sanctified. So now they can be used again. Even though they were used for idolatry, it's still permitted. Although if a Jew has an idol, he can't nullify it. But this belonged to the Bet HaMikdash. Originally, these were kelim of the Bet HaMikdash. There's a law that you can only make prohibited as idolatry something that you own. You can't go worship someone else's cow and make his cow prohibited. And so they didn't. These kelim belongs to the Bet HaMikdash, not to the Jews who used them as idolatry. Therefore, although they became prohibited, but they didn't become permanently prohibited, and therefore they re-sanctified them and then used them again. Therefore, just like these kelim in the Bet HaMikdash that were used for Avodah Zarah were able to be re-sanctified and then used again in the Bet HaMikdash, so too the kelim in Bet Chonyo, which wasn't even idolatrous, certainly should be able to be used in the Bet HaMikdash. And through this pasuk, Rabbi Yosef ben Shaul challenged Rabbi Yehuda's stringent ruling. Amar lo, Baruch atah l'shamayim, shechazart li'abedati, hechanu shegenaznum, v'hikdashnu, shekidashnu acherim tachtehem. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, thank you to heaven. Right, you are blessed from heaven that you have returned my lost object. That pasuk that I forgot, you reminded me of the pasuk that you cited as a source for leniency. That actually is the very pasuk that I used for my stringent ruling, because I interpret the pasuk differently. When it says that they prepared those vessels that were used for idolatry, prepared means that they buried them. And when it says sanctified, it's not referring to the same vessels, but rather new vessels that they came and sanctified instead of them. So that pasuk actually shows that a vessel of the Bet HaMikdash that was used for idolatry is prohibited forever. And so too, the vessels in the temple of Onias are prohibited forever. Lema mesayah le. Let's try to back up Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's opinion that these are prohibited from the following source, Mishnah in Masechet Midot. Mizrachit Sefonit ba ganzu bet Chashmonai et abnei hamizbeach sheshikesu anshe Yavan. Says there that there were 4 chambers on the Temple Mount, and the northeastern chamber of the Bet HaMikdash was the one where they put the stones of the Mizbeach that the Greeks had desecrated. When you had the Bet HaMikdash and it was run properly and everything was okay in the second Bet HaMikdash. And then at the time of the Hasmonean revolt, the Hellenizers came and desecrated the Mizbeach and put pig on it to idolatry. And then the Chashmonim came and re-sanctified the Bet HaMikdash. And they said, what are we going to do with the altar, even though it was originally made as a proper altar, but then it was used for Avodah Zarah. So they took the stones, they took it apart, and they put it away in the northeastern chamber. That's it. They'll decide one day when Eliyahu comes to see what to do with these stones. And Rav Shashat said that when it says sheshiketsu in the Mishnah, it means that they were desecrated to idolatry. And so we can learn from here that anything, even the kelim of the Bet HaMikdash, like the Mizbeach itself, that although it was for proper use originally, once it's used for Avodah Zarah, that's it. You can't use it again. Otherwise, they wouldn't have had to put the stones away. They could have rededicated the stones, re-sanctified them, but they didn't. So you see, they put them away. So too, the vessels in Bet Chonyo, you're not allowed to use. So isn't this a good proof for the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Amar Papa, Hatam kerash kach udrash, tichtib uba perisim vechileluha. Rav Papa says no. The Mizbech and the Bet HaMikdash is different because there they found a pasuk in Yechezkel and they interpreted it. The pasuk says that robbers shall enter into the Bet HaMikdash, and profane it. Chileluha. Profaning means that it is no longer considered a holy object. When the Hellenizers came in and they profaned the Mizbeach, they made it into a not holy Mizbeach, into a Mizbeach for Avoda Zara, which became totally prohibited. Once it's totally prohibited, then it certainly cannot be used ever again for a Mizbeach, for Gavoa. But that's not true for the vessels in Bet Chonyo, which were not completely profaned. They were not used even for Avodah Zara. They were just used improperly. So this is not the same. The Mizbeach had a specific law that because it was profaned and therefore no longer holy and then used for Avodah Zara, that's even stricter. That's why they had to put them away. Amri, Hechina Avid. At that time, the Chashmonaim came and sanctified the Bet HaMikdash. They said, what are we going to do with these stones? Nit berinhu avanim shelamot amar Chamana. Nin serinhu lo tanif alem barzel amar Chamana. Should we have a non-Jew, since they were desecrated by non-Jews, there were Jews also involved, the Hellenizers, but there were also non-Jews that came and made it into Avodah Zarah, so we'll consider it not an idol or mizbeach, a vessel used for non-Jewish worship. So therefore, technically, a non-Jew can nullify it. So should we have a non-Jew break them and thereby nullify them, and then we can use them again? But you can't, because you can't break them. The mizbeach has to be made out of unhewn stones, whole stones, so we can't break them. And should they chisel them? But the pasuk says that by chiseling them, by break off a little, but the pasuk says that you cannot lift any iron tool on the stones that you use for the mizbeach. So there's no way for the non-Jews to nullify these stones. So therefore, we can't nullify them and then make them usable again. We ask, okay, we understand that you can't break them and then use them again for a mizbeach, because mizbeach has to be whole stones. But why not let the non-Jew break them, and then they'll be permitted, and you can take them for yourself, take them home, whatever, use them for pavement, use them to build your own home. Mila amar Rav Oshaya, bikshu lignoz kol kesef v'zahav shebaolam mishum kaspad v'dahaba shel Yerushalayim v'avinan ba Yerushalayim havya ruba de alma. Didn't Rav Oshaya say that the sages wanted to put away all the gold and silver in the whole world because of the gold and silver in Yerushalayim? In other words, after the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed and the Romans came and took the gold and silver that was in the Bet HaMikdash, that gold and silver was consecrated, it was holy, and therefore should not be used by anybody. And so the sages at that point said, where did this gold and silver go that the Romans took? I don't know, they took it and they made it into coins, they made it into jewelry, whatever they did with it, it's scattered all around the world. And so the sages wanted to gather together all the gold and silver in the whole world and put it in genizah so that it would not be used. And regarding that statement, Vavinan ba, we analyzed it and we asked, is Jerusalem the majority of the world? When you make a law, you follow the majority. Majority of gold and silver in the world is not from Yerushalayim. So now that it left Jerusalem and got mixed up with all the gold and silver in the world, so therefore it should be permitted. It doesn't make any sense that the rabbis would even think of, even if it were possible, would even try to put in genizah all the gold and silver in the world. Ela amar Abaye bikshu lignoz dinara hadriyana turiyana shifa mipnei tib'a shel Yerushalayim ad shemasula mikra min haTorah shemutar uba'u ba peritzim vechileluha. Rather, Abaye explains, no, they didn't want to put away all the gold and silver in the whole world, but rather they wanted to put into genizah only the worn out coins from Hadrian and Trajan. Trajan and Hadrian were emperors that ruled soon after the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed. Trajan from 98 to 117, and then Hadrian after that from 117 to 138. And because they ruled soon after the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, the gold and silver that they used for minting coins was more likely to be from Yerushalayim. In fact, we know that here there are examples of coins from time of Hadrian and from the time of Trajan that were in fact minted in Jerusalem, which they renamed Aila Capitolina. And so here you go, these coins very likely were actually from gold and silver that were taken from the Bet HaMikdash. In fact, the Colosseum in Rome was built from the riches that were taken from Yerushalayim, it says so, in a plaque in the Colosseum itself. So we surely, soon after the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, those coins were likely from the Bet HaMikdash, and therefore, even many years later, those coins were already worn out. But the rabbis wanted to collect those coins from Hadrian and Trajan and put them in Geniza so that nobody should benefit from things that were consecrated to the Bet HaMikdash. And so they were thinking of doing that until they found the pasuk, the same pasuk that we mentioned before from Yechezkel, that says, "Robbers shall enter and profane it," which means that when the Romans came in, they profaned the gold and silver so that it was not Kodesh, it was not consecrated anymore. And therefore, it's permitted for people to use. So therefore, even if a Jew has one of these coins and it's likely that it came from the Bet HaMikdash, it's already been profaned, and therefore, you don't have to put it in Geniza. Since we know that was true for the gold and silver, why don't we say the same law for the stones of the altar, that those also, because they were profaned, so let an idolater break them apart, nullify their idolatrous status, and then why not allow a Jew to take it home and use it as building material? That's the question. The answer is Hatam la ishtameshu behu lagavoa. Hacha kevanti ishtamash behu lagavoa. Lavorachara li ishtamushe behu hedyota. In that case of the gold and silver was not offered to God. It's that gold and silver is owned by the Bet HaMikdash to use it to buy things, but there's no offering of gold and silver, and therefore it was not actually used in sacrifice, so that the idolaters can profane, and then anyone can use it. But the Mizbeach itself was used for sacrifices to heaven. And therefore, it's not proper, it's not respectful for ordinary people to go and take it and use it as building material in their home. That would not be right. And therefore, they decided to take these stones and put them away in the northeastern chamber. Next Mishnah, Nochri mevatel avoda zara shelo v'shel chavero. An idolater can nullify an idol that he owns or that his friend owns. Another goy who owns one, the idolater can nullify those, and then they're permitted for a benefit. V'Yisrael en mevatel avoda zara shel nochri. However, a Jew has no ability to nullify an idol that belongs to a nochri, and certainly cannot nullify an idol that he himself owns. This is a law that we've been referring to many times, and here is the source. Hamevatel avodah zara mevatel mishamesheha. Bitel mishamesheha mishameshin mutarin bihi asura. If someone, again a nochri, who nullifies an idol itself, then its accessories are already automatically nullified because they were only accessories to the main idol, and therefore they are certainly nullified. However, if someone nullified only the accessories, then the accessories themselves are permitted for use, but the idol itself is still prohibited. Matni le Shimon be Nochri mevatel avodah zara shelo v'shel havero. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi taught his son, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi, the following halacha, that a nochri can nullify his own avodah zara or avodah zara that belongs to another nochri. The very halacha that we have in the Mishnah. Rabbi taught it to his son. Amar lo, Rabbi, shanita lanu biyaldutcha nochri mevatel avodah zara shelo v'shel Yisrael. But the son said, he's talking to his father. He calls his father Rabbi, not as an acronym for Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, but Rabbi, my master. When you were young, you taught us a different version of the halacha that said that a nochri can nullify an idolatry that belongs to him and also that belongs to a Yisrael. So even if a Jew owns an idol, a non-Jew can come and nullify it. And now you taught us otherwise. De Israel mi kame batela. Is that true? If an idol belongs to a Jew, can it be nullified by anybody, even by an idolater? We saw the pasuk quoted earlier that anything that's an idol, you have to put it away in a hidden place because there's no way to nullify it and then use it. Rather, it has to be put away. Amar Rabbi Hillel bered Rabbi Volas la nisrecha sheyesh lo ba shutafut. Rabbi Hillel, the son of Rabbi Volas, interesting name, you don't come by that name so often, and he says that this halacha that Rabbi said when he was young applies only to a case where there's a partnership between a Jew and a non-Jew. They both own the idol together. That's the case in which we say that the non-Jewish partner can nullify the idol because it belongs to Shelo v'Shel Yisrael. It belongs to both of them together. So there, since he has some ownership in it, he can nullify it totally. But indeed, if it's owned only by a Jew, then nobody can nullify that idol. And now we wonder, what was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's reasoning when he was young, and what was his reasoning? Why did he change his mind when he was old? When he was young, he thought that when a Jew worships an idol, he's having in mind the intention of the idolater. The idolaters, they think this is important, and so that's why I think it's important also. But if a non-Jewish idolater comes and nullifies it for himself, then certainly the Jew also will consider it nullified. So therefore, he said that a non-Jew can nullify the idol of a Jew. That's what he thought when he was young. But when he got older, he reasoned that a Jew, if he worships idolatry, it's on his own terms. He himself thinks that this idol is important, and therefore, even if a Nochri comes and nullifies it, he's nullifying it only for himself. But for a Yisrael, that he can only nullify his own, but the Nochri has no ability to nullify that an idol that belongs to a Jew because the Jew considers it important on his own terms, and therefore there's no way to nullify an idol owned by a Yisrael. Now, this statement that we quoted from Rabbi Hillel, the son of Rabbi Volas, some apply it not the way we applied it just now, but rather apply it to the continuation, in the clause in the continuation of the Mishnah that says, Yisrael eno mebatel avoda zara shel nochri. The Jew has no ability to nullify an idol that belongs to a non-Jew. We mentioned this some dapim ago, that we're afraid that when the Jew picks it up, in order to nullify it, but during that few seconds that he picks it up, he might say, "Oh, what a nice idol," and take possession of it. And if he takes possession, then he cannot nullify it at all. And so certainly he cannot nullify his own. Peshita, we ask, isn't that obvious that a Jew has no ability to nullify avodah zara of a non-Jew? Amar Rabbi Hillel bere. So this is the statement that Rabbi Hillel said, that why do we even need to say this? It's so obvious. And the answer is, we need to say it in order to include a case where an idol is owned jointly by a Nochri and a Yisrael. And you might think then, maybe the Jew can nullify it because it's partly owned by a non-Jew. V'kamashmalan Yisrael hu delama batel de Nochri, Nochri de nafshe mevatel. And so it comes to teach us that the Jew cannot revoke the idol that belongs to the non-Jew, even that share that he owns, but a non-Jew can revoke the status of his own object of worship. And so it's this statement was going on that clause. And now a third interpretation, Ika dematnila a baraita. Some apply that statement, Rabbi Hillel's statement, to a baraita, not to our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya Omer, Avodah Zara shel Yisrael ena betela olamit. Rabbi Shimon ben Menasya said that an idol that belongs to a Jew cannot be nullified ever. My olamit, why does it say ever? Just say ena betela. Amar Rabbi Hillel bered Rabbi Volas lo nisracha ela sheyesh lo lagoy b'shutafut v'kamashmalan disel adata denafshe palach. And Rabbi Hillel, the son of Rabbi Vola, said, you know what Olamit comes to add? It comes to include yet another case of a Jew and a non-Jew that own an idol together in partnership, and therefore comes to teach us that when a Jew worships an idol, he's doing it based on his own intention, his own terms, that he himself considers it an idol. And therefore, even if it's owned by both of them together, it cannot be nullified by anyone. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.